Good morning. My name is Jason Lyons and I am the head of venue here at the Roundhouse. A warm welcome to everybody who is joining us online. For this morning's Round the Room, this is our occasional industry networking forum. The Bedigal people are the traditional custodians of the lands on which the Roundhouse is built, and in the spirit of reconciliation, we'd like to recognise all of the traditional custodians of country across Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and we would also extend that respect to any of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are joining us this morning. I'm in the Singapore rooms, which are upstairs, one of the breakout spaces at the Roundhouse. If you visited us since the 2018 renovations, you'll be familiar with how multi-purpose our venue is. 9 breakout spaces upstairs, a main atrium, 2 bars, 2 courtyards, and since we're talking about accessibility this morning, some good news. Whilst we've been in lockdown, the light rail is now running to the doorstep, so very pleased about that. Last year, the forums that we hosted here in the venue focused on sustainability. We were exploring as a venue how we could better improve the environmental footprint we leave from events. For those of you who attended those sessions, or if you're interested in understanding how we are developing our sustainability initiatives, you can go to our website, unswroundhouse.com, and use the keyword search sustainability, and you'll find some information there about our current initiatives. Obviously, with the coronavirus pandemic, video services are heavily in demand in the events industry. And in recent months, we've seen a huge uptick both from our clients and also the sessions that we've been attending, as I'm sure you have as well. We've been partnering with Art Production House for the last year to provide those video services for our clients. So I just wanted to give a shout out before we get started to Dan and to Aaron and the art production team for making this stream happen today. We really appreciate it. We're here today to connect with industry stakeholders and to promote positive change for events. Greater accessibility increases your reach, it creates an inclusive environment, and it enhances the services that as a venue that we can provide to all patrons coming through the venue. To get some insight on what we as a venue and you as an event organiser can do, we're joined today by a panel of 3 guests. We have Todd Winther from Young Care Australia, we have Terry Cumming from the UNSW Disability Innovation Institute, and Michelle Davey representing Splendour in the Grass. I'm going to get the guests to each introduce themselves, and then we're going to dig into some questions. If you have any questions for any of our guests today, please type them into the chat box in Zoom, and we'll try to get to them after we've talked to all of our panellists. So let me start by saying good morning to Todd.
Hello everyone, my name is Todd. Chiefly my role at the moment is the Grants Administrator at Young Care Australia. We're based in Brisbane. Part of that role is making sure that people with high care physical disabilities have access to the equipment and support they need to remain at home. In addition to my role, I'm also an academic and a writer. I have 2 degrees in political science and have had experience in a variety of different publications providing political commentary.
Thank you, Todd. Good morning, Terry Cumming.
Good morning. As you said, I'm a professor of special education within the School of Education here at UNSW. And my other role is I'm the academic lead education for the Disability Innovation Institute.
Thank you. And hello, Michelle, can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. It's great to be here. I've been working in the events industry for a little over 10 years now. I previously worked at Young Care with Todd, and since 2017, I've been the Access Liaison Manager for Splendour in the Grass. So my role is to be the liaison for people with a disability that are attending the festivals. I'm their main contact prior to and during the festival, and my role is to understand what their needs are and try to do as much as possible to meet those needs.
Thank you. Todd, if I can come to you first.
When you're looking to attend events, what are some of the key elements that would drive your decision to attend? What's going to make you feel safer at an event that you attend?
Because I require an electrical chair, physical access is a potential issue. So that's obviously the first thing I look at is, can I access the actual venue? Can I do it safely and on my own? Because the majority of the events I attend by myself, and even if I don't attend them by myself, I don't want a carer following me around and helping me at the event. Am I able to blend in without sticking out from the crowd? Yes, people are going to notice me because I'm in a wheelchair, but I want to be, thought of as just your average participant or viewer. Will I be able to enjoy the same benefits as my able-bodied counterparts? It's really, really important that I should be able to access every single opportunity as a person with a disability that my able-bodied counterparts would. I think it's a form of discrimination if I am unable to access all the options that an event would provide.
Can you give us any examples of this? Like, what's an event that's made a positive experience for you, and how, as event organisers, how can we implement this into our events?
Sure. Generally, the sporting events or the music festivals are usually very good. Because I'm based in Brisbane, I'm going to use examples. So, for example, the music festivals like Blues Fest at Byron Bay, Woodford during the last week of the year between Christmas and New Year, and yes, Splendour in the Grass. And I'm not just saying that because Michelle is here and I know her well. Splendour in the Grass is great for people with wheelchairs, but the main thing I want to emphasise today, and I'll refer to this later, probably the most important lesson you can take away from what I have to say is that no two people with disabilities are the same, even if they have a condition, the same condition. For example, I have cerebral palsy, but the way I interact with my disability is very different with how somebody else with the same condition also interacts with their disability. Accessibility is not just a human rights issue, it's also good for your bottom line, because if people with disabilities are able to access your event or venue, it also means their friends, their families, their carers or support workers can access too, which means more tickets for you to sell, which means it's better for your bottom line.
Can we talk about best language with you and best practice for event staff if we're assisting someone that has a disability at an event?
Sure. The language itself can be a bit contentious because each person, again, interacts with their disability differently. But in a general sense, the best way is to use what's called person-first language. So the way you would interact with someone with a disability is not calling me a disabled person. It's calling me a person with a disability. That may seem to be some semantics, but it's very important because I'm able to do a lot of things because or in spite of my disability. My disability doesn't control every aspect of my life, and that's really important to recognise. In terms of best practice for your event, again, no two people with disabilities are the same. When you're interacting with a person with a disability, regardless of whether you think they might be non-verbal or verbal, it's really important that you interact with the person with a disability first, despite what your preconceptions may be. And if you find that person with a disability is non-verbal, generally the person with them or through their communications advice would be able to tell you what the appropriate method of communication is. And the last point is this may seem trite, but people with disabilities are just like you. I mean, it happens in every event. Some random stranger comes up to me and they say something like, "Oh, it's so good you're able to attend a concert," or "I'm really surprised that you like music." And I'm like, why? I'm a human being. My disability doesn't render me deaf or uh, or a hermit that's been socially isolated. You know, people with disabilities can be a music lover, a sports fanatic, a hippie, a railer, a poet, a teeny bopper, or a hipster. So in essence, they could be anyone that you could just meet in the course of your daily events. Their disability doesn't change their personality or who they are.
Thank you, mate. If you do have any questions for Todd, please type them into the Zoom chat box, and we will try to throw them at Todd later in the session. Terry, can I come to you to talk about technology? Obviously, an increasing part of the live events industry. How can we use technology in a live learning setting, such as a conference or a workshop, to enhance accessibility?
Okay, well, I think the first thing, I know we're talking about a live setting, but the first way you can use it is to also be able to live stream, so that some people who have access issues, maybe it's just even being able to get to a venue, they can still participate. Also, some of those platforms, especially, I think I've been finding Teams the best for this lately, will automatically close caption for you. So I think providing closed captioning is really important. You know, and that doesn't replace having an Auslan interpreter, but since we're talking about tech. Also, large text for presentations possibly, Bluetooth microphones for presenters and for the audience, the use of hearing loops, the person giving the presentation, if they can, you know, describe any charts or graphs or whatever. I always talk about universal design for learning so that everybody has equal access to materials. And one of those is representation. So we encourage teachers or lecturers or presenters to present their material in as many ways possible. And while that's good, at the same time, it can be limiting to some people, as I said, charts, graphs, those sorts of things. So we have to make sure that we provide a way for everybody to access those things also. When we talk about multiple ways for the audience to engage, there's technology, there's platforms like Zeetings or Poll Everywhere, where the audience can actually participate and answer questions and polls and things like that, ask questions right in the presentation from a mobile device. But again, making sure that people have the access to it. Providing some information ahead of time or using QR codes so that people can access some of that information in an alternative format would also be a good way.
What are some of the challenges for us in terms of making that technology accessible for events?
Well, I'm sure that you've probably experienced this. I think the main challenge is just knowing what technology is out there. It moves so fast, so it's difficult to always know. Also, some of it's very costly and expensive, and putting on conferences and workshops can be expensive anyway. The second challenge is also having the knowledge of how to use any of those technologies and making sure that the participants know how to use the technology. I use Zeetings quite a bit, but I have to do a little tutorial before with a new group many times to show them how to do it so they can participate. And I think we need to talk about the digital divide. I said that, you know, live streaming is great for people who can't get there, but if they don't have the technology or access to the internet, that's another barrier or a challenge.
I think everybody's been experiencing that, trying to upskill in how to use Teams and Zoom and Google Hangouts and all sorts of things over the last 3 months. Can I ask you about invisible disabilities? We often design accessibility of events around inclusiveness for people with physical disabilities. Are there any considerations that we should be giving to people with invisible disabilities at events?
That's interesting that you would ask me that because I have ADHD. So I'm already getting antsy because I've been sitting in this chair since 10:30. So I would say providing access to a separate quiet area to allow participants to take a break if needed. If it's a sit-down kind of an event, make sure there's also a place people can stand that's kind of out of the way and not distracting for other people. And if it's a standing activity, making sure that it's not really technology, but making sure that people have the opportunity to sit down, having some chairs there. Always asking ahead of time if anybody has special needs or requests. Some people's disabilities have to do with diet. So if you're catering an event, making sure that you're catering for different food allergies and things. And probably lighting is super important. Strobe lighting and things are a good thing for everybody.
Fantastic, thank you. Michelle, you're here today with your Splendour in the Grass hat on. I was discussing mobility challenges recently with a music festival promoter who gets around his site in a wheelchair. You're at Splendour in the Grass, you're exposed to the elements in the middle of winter. Based on your experiences at Splendour, what aspects do you need to keep in mind when you are planning accessibility for those events?
Yeah, so with outdoor events, there are obviously some limitations that do apply. The North Byron Parklands, for instance, are locally owned, and keeping the natural landscape is vital in the participation and partnership in running events there. It's a natural amphitheatre. It's got grassy fields. There are some walkways and a few gravel roads, but it's kept as natural as possible in terms of permanent infrastructure, as that's a priority for the owners and the local community. So the weather and the landscape is something that everybody attending has to factor in. So we bring in as much temporary infrastructure for accessibility as possible, and then try to educate those that are attending what to expect so they can make an informed decision whether or not attending is right for them.
What are the key costs involved when you make those events more accessible and inclusive?
Well, obviously, infrastructure is a major cost. The toilets and showers we bring in for people with a disability. We also set up viewing platforms at the three main stages. So they're temporary structures that are used so that people with a disability can go onto those stages with their companions. The other cost that we have is we have a companion card policy. So this allows holders of national or state companion cards to request a free of charge companion ticket. So it's the equivalent of whatever is purchased by the person with a disability. So they're basically bringing a companion or a carer along free of charge. The other main cost, I guess, is my role. And as I mentioned, I'm the main contact person for them during and before and during the festival, whether that's to ask a question about what's available on site. It might be to arrange their companion tickets to be issued, or whatever their needs are. They come to me and can discuss that with me. And I then prepare a brief to send out to everybody with all the key information of what they need to know when they're on site. My number's available so they can contact me throughout the festival for any issues. I go around and check in with campers every morning that are staying on site just to make sure everything's okay with them. I go around to the viewing platforms and check in on everyone as well as much as possible. So I think for a festival of that size, having a dedicated person is definitely worth it from a cost perspective. Otherwise, the requests and, more importantly, the people may just get lost in a crowd. But I think generally for events that may not work in terms of having a dedicated person, but using the concept isn't important because, if someone's attending and they have dietary requirements for a catered event, we ask them, what are your dietary requirements? But I don't know that necessarily for events, and from venues' point of view, that we ask them if they have accessibility requirements. So I think having that point of contact is really important. I know from my time working at Young Care, we found that a lot of events weren't necessarily accessible, even though they said that they were. They may have an access ramp for a wheelchair, but it might not suit a wheelchair for someone with high care needs because they're larger in size, like Todd's is. They may have a disability car park allocated, but when you actually look at the car park, it's not flat enough or wide enough for someone to transfer from their car to their wheelchair. So I think in a lot of cases, we didn't book the venue because it didn't suit our needs. So if you are an event manager, pick a venue that is accessible. And if you are a venue, look at what you do have and see if there are ways that you can improve your accessibility to make it open for more people to attend.
Implementing accessibility, especially on a site like that, is going to require a really strong ground crew. What are the steps that you take in terms of research and implementation and training your crew on accessibility?
Yeah, so accessibility is actually planned as a part of the overall layout for the festival. So where the viewing platforms will be set up in perspective to the stages, where the toilets will be, that they're close to access to all the stages. The plans are sent out by management for review and feedback prior to finalising. From my side, most of the setup is the same as previous years and with a few tweaks. So in terms of the setup by the crew, they take the finalised plan that's been reviewed and signed off by management and go and set it up. And then I go on site about a week before the festival and we'll go around the whole site and check all the items that need to be set up to make sure that they're correct. I'll communicate anything that's missing that needs to be looked at to the relevant department and or to management, depending on what needs to be fixed. And then I continue those checks throughout the festival just to make sure everything is what it needs to be. So as an example, we put padlocks on all the accessible toilets. The code's available by contacting either myself prior to or during the festival or by going to our information booth on site. So I go around and make sure that all the toilets have a lock, that the code that I've been given works on the locks, and I check regularly to make sure that they're still in place and haven't gone missing. In terms of training, we have utilised an online training program for our staff through Dylan Alcott's company, Get Skilled Access. So it's a training program that provides a deeper understanding of and how to become confident working and servicing people with a disability or accessibility needs. So we rolled that out across key personnel like security, gate managers and our information booth staff. And for me personally, I found the training was amazing because it's written from the perspective of someone with a disability.
You mentioned in terms of the way that you communicate to staff in terms of a briefing. What about during an event in terms of briefing staff on their activities throughout an event like Splendour?
So the main stuff that I need to brief are the information booth people because they'll get a lot of queries. They're people on gates, and then I use some volunteers in our camping and car parking area. So for the information booth and gate staff, I'll meet with the managers of these areas and give them an overview of who's attending, how many people, and just provide them with information that might be relevant. For instance, the code for the toilet so that they can pass it on if they get a query. For them, it's just a snapshot in case they receive any queries. We're all on the same radio channel, so they can contact me any time if an issue comes up, or they can give me a call if they've had someone come to them and ask them about information they're not sure of. In terms of the volunteers, I meet them at the start of their shift. I brief them on what their role is and the key things that they need to know. I give them a prepaid phone so they can call me at any time during the shift if I'm not near where they are to try to manage an issue that may arise. And then in terms of security, I will go around and introduce myself to the security staff located at the key spots, like the viewing platforms and the gates, as normally it's the same people on those locations throughout the festival. So I just make sure that they've received the right information, they know the process in terms of accreditation, and they know that they can contact me if there are any issues, or that there is a person there if someone's coming up with any queries.
Fantastic, thank you. In terms of accessibility, are there any elements that you've implemented that haven't worked for you? Are there any key learnings from things that haven't quite worked out in the way that they were planned?
Yeah, well, the size of the festival is growing each year. So the festival footprint changes every year. So this year we're due to have 50,000 people attending, which is obviously huge. So because the footprint is changing the size, slight changes are made, and some things work and some things haven't. So last year, for example, we added additional fencing to the camping area, which changed the layout of where the truck would come to pump out the toilets for the disability camping area, and also the staff camping area, which was nearby. So the change meant that the water coming from the truck during the pump out and water refill created a puddle and then obviously some mud near the campers, which was obviously not great for the person that was camping who was in a wheelchair. So, on the fly, we had to fix the issue by filling in the muddy area as best we could during the festival. And then I included the need for the improvement in my debrief post-festival. So the main information I include in my debrief comes from those that have attended. I send out a survey to everyone that I have contact with for them to provide feedback on their own experience. So we ask them what worked and what didn't work. So I take that feedback and put it in my event debrief that's sent to management, and then management look at that and take that into account for the next festival. So I obviously include my own feedback, but I think it's important to understand the perspective of the people with a disability, what worked and what didn't, rather than assuming myself.
Thank you. Before we get to audience questions, we had a couple sent in. Michelle, is Splendor going to happen in October?
I hope so. At this stage, they're still planning it as it is, but obviously it's going to be a result of what happens with COVID, and they'll be working with, health and the government to make a decision. But at this stage, it's going ahead as planned.
Todd, can I come to you first with a couple of questions that we've had sent in? Are there any organisations or associations that you would recommend that event organisers could contact to get further information or a better understanding of accessibility in their planning?
Sure. The first one that I would recommend is People with Disabilities Australia. That organisation is run by advocates and people with disabilities. They're a national organisation, so they have a wide variety of contacts. I would also potentially contact the National Disability Insurance Agency just to get a sense of what the government requirements are in terms of accessibility. And I'd also ask people if they know other people with disabilities, that they could potentially talk to them and run through some ideas, because like Michelle said, it's very important to get feedback from people with disabilities, because unless you're in the situation that you're in, you really have no grasp of what the potential issues might be.
Terry, similar question for you. So we do have a lot of people joining us today who are part of the University of New South Wales. If you're planning an event on the University of New South Wales, is there any university organisations that are worth communicating with regarding accessibility?
I think DEX does a lot of things with accessibility. The Disability Innovation Institute, we do a lot of stuff with co-production and things like that, but not so much accessibility. I actually did a little bit of research before I sat in on this roundtable. There's a lot of places outside of here. Zero Project does conference accessibility guidelines. The Australian Network on Disability does an event accessibility checklist. The Disability Service Commission has a website creating accessible events, and the New South Wales government even has an event starter guide that has a lot of information on planning your conference to be accessible.
Do you have any techniques, Terry, for organisers or tips for us to understand accessibility when we're considering venue choices? So if you're an event organiser thinking about putting on something at the Roundhouse, what sort of things should you be looking for within a venue to see how accessible it is?
Well, I think also, like what Todd said, learning from experience and maybe some mistakes also, but you don't want to raise platform if you're going to have people speak. They might be in a wheelchair and not be able to navigate that. You need to have enough space so that you can have the seating so that people can get around. The technology, if you're going to use technology to make things more accessible, you need to have a space where it works. I did it wasn't a conference, it was kind of like a seminar, and it was dependent on having the internet work, and it just didn't. So that's something that can like totally destroy your whole event. So there's just, some of the things that you might just take for granted and they might not be there. So you've really got to, I would say, just looking at some of those checklists that are available also.
We talked about having things like captions available for online content earlier, and that was one of the things we were looking at for this webinar today. And actually, Jackie, who's with us today, said that it's really difficult for her to access the webinar because live captioning isn't available. So that's a really good learning for us and anybody who's producing a webinar in terms of being able to look at making it accessible with live captions.
Yeah, that's expensive.
Yeah.
I did another one on universal design for learning, and they hired AI Media to do it, and I know it wasn't cheap.
Michelle, can I ask you if there's any specific guidelines that we can follow to make content accessible, either before, during, or after an event? Obviously, we're seeing a lot of that now with live streaming and recording of content, but from a perspective of font sizes or colors or document formats, things that are going to make content more accessible in an online space?
Yeah, I guess it's what Terry mentioned, is making sure that the size is available, that it is available in different formats. Obviously, if someone does, say, have epilepsy, as an example, flashing lights isn't going to be something that's going to be suitable for them. Having quiet spaces and allowing people to watch the content in the way that suits them and when it suits them. So whether that's different types of formats, with closed captions for videos or without, and just making sure that the information there is clear for everybody and not just for the majority, but for everybody. So different types of video with words as opposed to just video content and nothing else.
Even just in terms of planning this event, we were looking at the different types of ticketing that's available to be able to create screen readers, so that which is now available through organisations like Humanitics, so that that visually impaired people are able to use a screen reader to actually get more of the content from the ticketing website. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us this morning, Todd, Terry, Michelle, and everybody who's joined in for the webinar. We really appreciate as a venue your tips, and we hope that we've provided some for event organisers as well. If you did register for today's session, we're going to publish a report of today's key talking points, which will be in your inboxes this week. Thank you to Jess and Sharon from the Roundhouse team for all the groundwork preparing today's session. And again, thank you to Aaron and to Dan from Art Production House who provided the stream today. Have a fabulous Tuesday. We really appreciate you joining us this morning, and we look forward to the opportunity to open our venue doors again, hopefully sooner rather than later, for an event at the Roundhouse. Thank you and have a great day.